I wasn't expecting applause or balloons or a banner at the hospital entrance with my name on it or grandchildren smiling around my bed. All I wanted was someone to pick me up from the hospital, a familiar face at the reception desk. A simple, "Come on, Dad, let's go home." That's all. But when I hit send on that simple message, "Who can pick me up from the hospital tomorrow at 2 p.m.?" I never imagined that silence could be louder than any ICU alarm. It was 42 minutes without a response in the family group chat. 42. And yes, I counted, because after heart surgery with 2 bypasses and a third artery partially blocked, time drags like someone pulling a cross on their back. With each minute that passed without a notification, I felt a part of me confirming what maybe I had known for a long time. Nobody there saw me as part of anything anymore. The first response came from my own son, Vincent. He wrote like someone asking if the rice was ready. "Call an Uber, Dad. I'm watching TV." No emoji, no comma, no emotion whatsoever. Just that. Cold as the hospital tray food I pushed away at that same moment. The second came right after from his wife, my daughter-in-law. The same one I helped pay for their wedding when they said the budget had exploded. The same one who said she saw me as a second father. "Stay in the hospital another month. It's so much better here without you," she wrote with a laughing emoji. Laughing. I read that 3 times, as if I had trouble understanding, not because of the surgery, but because I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. And nobody, absolutely nobody in the group, wrote anything after that. No indignation emoji, no "stop that," no "I'll pick him up." I didn't respond right then. I turned off the screen, closed my eyes, and lay there trapped in that bed with hard sheets and a locked window, listening to the beep of the heart monitor, as if it were the last sound I had left from everything I once called family. I didn't cry. I just stayed quiet, because if there's one thing a man learns over time, it's that silence speaks. And when it's ignored by those who swore to care for you, the noise of loneliness settles like an echo inside your chest. The nurse came to do the final tests. The doctor entered with his clipboard, saying my heartbeat was stable, my blood pressure had responded well, that I could go home the next day. I smiled and said, "Great, doctor." He asked if someone would pick me up. I said, "Someone will figure it out." But inside, I already knew. The medical discharge was my family discharge, and it was mine. That night, the last I spent hospitalized, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about every penny I took from my pension to pay for my son's first car, the property I put in his name out of trust, the time I watched the grandchildren for 15 straight days while they traveled to Cancun because it was their first real honeymoon. All of that fell on me like dust from a ceiling that collapses slowly, silently, but crushingly. At dawn, I decided to get up. I went to the corridor window and watched the city lights. Outside, everything seemed orderly. Inside me, nothing was anymore. The next morning, promptly at 2 p.m., my name was called over the intercom. "Discharge authorized." The nurse smiled, said I was cleared to go, the paperwork was ready, just needed my companion. I thanked her and said I had a driver coming. It was a lie, but nobody there needed to know. I went down alone to the reception. Sat in one of those cold plastic chairs with my bag of folded clothes and test results in a manila envelope. I asked to use the landline phone. I called an executive transport service I knew from an old job. Asked for discretion. Asked them to come quickly. When the black car stopped at the side entrance, I thanked them and got in the back seat. It was the first time in a long while that I was inside a car where nobody called me old man, burden, or dead weight. While the car drove, I watched the city pass by the window. The same streets where I once took my son to school, the same avenue where I taught him to drive. And now there I was, returning from heart surgery like a stranger in a city I helped build with my own hands. At the front door, the driver asked if I needed help carrying things upstairs. I thanked him and said no. The key still turned in the lock, but what I would find behind the door was no longer what I had left before the operation. I entered slowly, smelling the paint from the last renovation I had paid for myself. The pictures on the wall were still in the same places, but the family photo from the living room, the one from our trip to Niagara Falls where I was smiling with the grandchildren on my lap, had disappeared. In its place was a new frame with Vincent and his wife arm in arm at a beach sunset. I wasn't in that photo, or on that wall, or apparently in their lives. No sound came from inside the house. The family dog, my companion every morning, didn't appear. Later I discovered they had left him at the sister-in-law's house because he was too much trouble. Deep down, I knew it wasn't the dog that bothered them. It was the old man sitting on the couch with a blanket over his legs, talking politics and asking if there was hot coffee. I crossed the house with my bag in hand. The hallway seemed narrower, colder. In my room, the windows were open, the mattress had been flipped, and there was a smell of disinfectant in the air. On the nightstand, a handwritten list by my daughter-in-law. Clean, wash sheets, change curtains, air out. Well, I hadn't even arrived yet, and they were already cleaning traces of my absence. I sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath, and stared at the ceiling. This was my house, or at least it had been. The deed was still in my name. The initial financing, I was the one who paid it. When Vincent wanted to leave his rental and start his life with dignity, I was the one who sold my car to help with the down payment. And now there I was, treated like an unwanted guest who came back early. In the kitchen, the refrigerator was full, but there was nothing I could eat. Nothing without fat, salt, or sugar. Everything the doctor had warned against. Nobody thought about that. Or they thought about it, but didn't care. I tried to convince myself it was my exaggeration, post-surgery sensitivity, emotional weakness. But when I sat down and picked up my phone, doubt became certainty. In the family group, nobody commented anything about my arrival. No, did you get home okay, Dad? No, do you need anything? Nothing. The last message was still the daughter-in-law's mockery. Stay in the hospital another month. That night, the last I would spend there, sleep didn't come. Only memories. I remembered the times I cleaned my father's house, so he'd let me go out with friends. I remembered when I helped Vincent write his first resume, the night we went together to the ER because he had a panic attack. I sat by his side all night. I said, "I'm here, son." And now, when I needed a ride from the hospital, he preferred to watch TV. The next day, I woke to the sound of conversation in the kitchen. It was my daughter-in-law's voice. "Is he home already?" "Oh, I didn't even notice. I thought he'd stay longer. I'm going out with the girls, need some distraction." As if I were an inconvenient visitor who arrived without warning. When I came out, the house was empty. On the table, a note. "There's food in the fridge, heat it in the microwave." That was it. No questions about the surgery stitches, no help with medications, no guidance, presents, nothing. Just a note from someone who wanted to show they had done their part. I sat at the table, looked at the note for a few seconds, and thought, this is how a man becomes invisible. First, they stop asking your opinion. Then they stop including you in decisions. Finally, they don't even bother to hide their relief when you disappear. That morning, I opened the living room window. The sun came in slowly. The same sun that lit the birthdays when I prepared the grill, the same that shone in Christmas photos, in trips, in Sunday mornings when I fried donuts for the grandchildren. Now it entered a house where my presence was noise, a stain, bothersome dust. Gradually, I began to notice the details. My armchair had disappeared. The corner where I read the newspaper had now become a corner with a decorative vase. The TV I used had gone to the children's room. My slippers were stored inside the closet. The cane I left leaning in the hallway had been put away so as not to obstruct circulation. Everything seemed millimetrically arranged for a new scenario. A scenario without me. During those days, I started observing more what they did, where they went, how long they stayed out. Vincent left the house at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays, only returned at 6 p.m. My daughter-in-law went to the gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays after lunch. During these hours, the house was empty. I knew that to leave, I first needed to ensure my departure wouldn't be noticed before the right time. On Saturday, I went to the small closet in my room. I took my old leather folder. Inside I kept some important documents. The health insurance booklet, the surgery report, the copy of the house deed. But there was more. There was a card nobody knew I still had. The private pension plan card I kept secret since I retired. When Vincent started talking about taking over the house finances to make it easier, I opened another hidden, protected account and transferred everything there. An old trick learned from my father. Never give all the keys to a house to someone who only sees you as an obstacle. I checked the balance. It was intact, more than enough for a start. Enough to guarantee a dignified restart. Not luxury, but autonomy. On Wednesday, while they were all out at a barbecue I, of course, wasn't invited to, I called an old work colleague, a retired journalist who now collaborated with a local radio and sometimes recommended people for interviews and campaigns. I told part of my story, enough to generate interest. He was silent for a moment, and then said, "This makes good material, but are you ready to be heard?" I took a deep breath and replied, "I'm not ready, but I'm alive, and that's enough." We scheduled coffee for Wednesday. Until then, I would keep everything in absolute silence. No expression, no different movement. I would be the same old man as always, quiet, invisible, at least in their eyes. Inside, however, the march had already begun. The interview was recorded at 3:17 p.m. They gave me a comfortable chair, a bottle of water, silence, and time. The reporter was a young man named Edward, with a beard and listening eyes. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just listened. And when he needed to ask questions, he did so with the delicacy of someone who had seen his own grandfather be forgotten. I told the essential, without names, without surnames. I spoke about the hospital, the message, the return home, the coldness, the attempt to renovate my room while I was still healing the stitches, the silence as punishment, the pain that's worse than physical. You realize you were useful until the moment you became dependent. "Do you think this abandonment is intentional?" he asked at the end. "I think it's convenient," I replied. Abandonment doesn't come all at once. It comes in the form of jokes, notes, a refrigerator full of things you can't eat. It comes as carelessness, and when you realize it, you've been reduced to background noise. The next night, I sat in the living room and turned on the TV as if I knew nothing. My daughter-in-law was on her phone. Vincent was eating dinner on his lap. The grandchildren were entertained with videos. When the news intro began, I turned up the volume. "Turn that down, Dad," she complained. "I want to see a story," I replied. They didn't pay attention until the image changed. And there I was. Not my face, but my voice. The reporter introduced the story with strong text. In modern life, many elderly people face abandonment within their own homes. This is the story of one of them. Silence fell like an axe. Vincent froze his fork. My daughter-in-law looked at the TV as if she'd seen a ghost. And then, my voice. "The worst abandonment isn't the one that leaves you alone. It's the one that makes you feel invisible, even surrounded by people." I looked to the side. Both were motionless, eyes fixed on the screen. One trembled, the other turned red, then pale, then red again. When the story ended, the phone rang and rang again and again. The family group lit up with notifications like a Christmas tree in December. The next morning, I woke with light invading the room, as if it were an announcement of something. The sun crossed the thin curtain and illuminated my face with a strength I hadn't felt in days. It was as if the world had returned to noticing me, and this time not as an old man sitting in the corner of the room, but as someone with a voice, with a story, with weight. I picked up my phone. It was packed. More than 100 notifications, WhatsApp messages, missed calls, emails, friend requests from strangers on social networks. Those same networks I always ignored, but now my name circulated on them like whispers at a street fair. The first message was from Mrs. Isabel, my neighbor across the street, who hadn't sent me anything since 2019 when I argued with her husband about a gutter leak. "Mr. Augustus, I saw you on TV last night." I cried. "You spoke for so many. God bless your strength." My daughter-in-law came downstairs still in pajamas, phone in hand, and the expression of someone who saw a live accident. She threw the device on the living room table and said loud enough for me to hear, "This is crazy. He exposed us. Now they think we're monsters." Vincent appeared next. Messy hair, low look, voice too gentle to be sincere. "Dad, why didn't you tell us? If you had talked to us, we could have explained. Avoided this." Explained. Avoided. They were talking as if I had planted that loneliness, as if I had simulated the cold words they typed, as if the empty chair at the hospital, the absence of an "I miss you, Dad," the mockery in text form, and the plans to turn my room into a closet had been delusions of a needy old man. The next afternoon, there was a knock at the door. It was Mr. Larival, a neighborhood resident for 40 years. He hugged me before I said anything. I was also left alone, Mr. Augustus. Not in the hospital, but in life. "Thank you for giving us a voice." He had tears in his eyes. He brought me a bag with homemade bread and a small bottle of coffee. He handed it to me with both hands, with dignity, with respect. That night, the phone rang. It was the station team. They wanted to let me know the story was being retransmitted nationally in a compilation of moving stories, that my account would be used as a call for a Sunday special. And there I was, sitting in the same chair as always. The same old man who had asked for a ride from the hospital was now being used as an example of strength on national television. On Friday, I closed the door for the last time. The latch turned as it always did, but that day the sound was different. It was the noise of something ending firmly, without haste, without hesitation. There were no tears, no anger, just the certainty that I no longer needed anyone's permission to exist in peace. The moving truck parked promptly at 8 a.m. 2 boxes, 1 suitcase, and a leather folder with my documents. That was everything. No furniture, no memories. What was important no longer fit in any of those walls. And what was mine I carried inside. The new house was simple, single-story, airy, with a small garden in the back and a porch where the morning sun hit. I was received by Mrs. Dolores, neighbor across the street, with a cornbread in her hands and a smile on her face. Here nobody meddles in anyone's life, but if you want to talk, the door is always open. I replied with a handshake that felt like a hug. For the first time in years, I felt welcome without having to prove anything. That night, I stretched the hammock in the living room and lay there, listening to the sound of wind crossing the trees. No shouting, no muffled argument behind walls, no hurried steps from people pretending you're not there, just the sound of the world breathing next to me. For the first time, I didn't have to ask for silence. It came. The phone still vibrated from time to time, but now I didn't run to see. Messages from Vincent, long, desperate, interspersed with voice messages full of broken phrases. Dad, please, we were wrong, but think of the children. I didn't respond because it was no longer with me. The story they starred in, of coldness, mockery, abandonment disguised as routine, ended the moment I closed the door. The rest was just echo, and I had chosen to live outside the cave. On Sunday, I received a visit from the lawyer. He brought the final version of the deed, already in the transfer process. The sale of the house was advancing, and with it the final chapters of what was once called home. He also brought the updated testament document. Everything was as I asked. Vincent and Renata had been removed. In their place, 3 institutions, a nursing home, a public hospital where I was well treated, and an NGO that teaches literacy to adults over 60. I signed with steady hands, and when the lawyer asked if I wanted to leave a letter for the children, I shook my head. No, they had silence when I needed them most. Now they would have it back. On Wednesday afternoon, something unexpected happened. A correspondence arrived without a return address. Inside, a sheet folded in half with a phrase written by hand. You are still my father, and I am still your son. Can I try again? There was no signature, but I knew whose it was. I folded the paper. I didn't tear it, didn't respond, just kept it, because forgiving is a choice and forgetting was never my obligation. I started eating better. I did new tests, started walking in the park. With each step, I felt that surgery had closed a wound in my chest, but life had opened space for something else, autonomy. On a Saturday morning, while watering the garden plants, a neighborhood boy passed by on a bicycle and shouted, "Good morning, Mr. Augustus." I waved, smiling. Nobody there knew what had happened. Nobody there needed to know. My name had returned to being just mine, and that was enough. At night, sitting on the porch, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I wrote a note to myself. You weren't weak for waiting, but you were too strong for leaving. And now, finally, you are free. Next to it, I left a glass with water and a slice of Mrs. Dolores's cornbread. Inside, the house was clean, the walls empty, the sofa still without marks, but in every corner there was what I hadn't had for years, space. Not just for furniture, but for myself. Because what they never understood is that when someone says, I don't need you anymore, it's not because they started to hate. It's because they finally learned to love themselves. Sometimes the greatest solitude doesn't come from abandonment. It comes from continuing to exist where there's no longer space for you. And that's what that house became. A space where I still breathe but no longer existed. But when you choose to leave, when you choose yourself, you discover that the most important voice was always your own.